Before we begin, I just want to again gently acknowledge the weight of what we're about to explore. This episode doesn't center the obvious villains. It speaks to the silence of good men and why so many of us fall into it. And if that stirs discomfort or guilt or regret, that's okay. You're allowed to pause, breathe, return when you're ready. There's no shame in stepping away when something touches a nerve. But if you choose to stay, know this. We're not going to sit in condemnation. We'll walk towards clarity, courage, and the kind of integrity that gives you back your voice. When we think about the harm that's done by movements like 764, our focus often lands on the loudest voices, the ones who are spitting venom, spewing hatred, or inciting chaos. But that's only part of the picture. The other part is the quieter part, and it's made up of men who don't say those things, but who also don't really say anything at all. Men who look away. Men who know that something is off, but stay silent. Not because they agree, but because speaking up feels too costly. And here's the harder truth to admit. Many of these men are good. They're decent, they're intelligent, sensitive, they love their families, they care about people, they want to do what's right. But somewhere along the way, they learn that doing what's right often requires more risk than they feel ready to take on. So they don't. They don't join the chaos, but they also don't confront it either. They hear the slurs in the locker room perhaps, but say nothing. They see the manipulation online and scroll past it. They witness the misogyny or that's masquerading as male empowerment. But they rationalize their silence by telling themselves it's not their fight. But it is. Silence doesn't stay neutral. In spaces where harm is being done, silence is read as consent. And movements like 764, they don't need everyone to participate. They just need most men to stay quiet. They need good men to believe that discomfort is far worse than the damage, and that being misunderstood is worse than allowing others to suffer. And that keeping the peace is more important than keeping one's integrity. And the reasons I think that we look away are complex. Some of us are afraid. We don't want to be singled out. We don't want to be mocked or rejected or labeled as soft, naive, or weak. And then others of us are just exhausted. We're tired of speaking up before, and we've been met with defensiveness or rage or just dismissal. And so we tell ourselves it's not worth it. That's someone else's job, and that we've done enough. And still there are others who are deeply unsure. We sense something is wrong, but we don't really have the language to name it. We know that we don't want to be there, but we don't know how we're supposed to become something more. And in this uncertainty, we choose quiet. But here's what I've learned, both through painful mistakes and personal reckonings. Integrity isn't always about knowing what to say. It's more about refusing to pretend that silence is harmless. Integrity asks you to stay present, even when your voice is shaking. Intimacy asks you to care deeply enough to risk discomfort for the sake of truth. And together, these two call you to stop looking away and to start showing up. In this episode, we're going to explore why silence of good men has become, I think, one of the most dangerous tools in movements like 764. We're going to unpack a little bit of the emotional and cultural and relational forces that are shaping our hesitations. And we'll imagine what it might look like to stand in that tension and speak into that discomfort and to reclaim our voices not in rage, but in this quiet and grounded power. And the silence of good men doesn't usually begin with indifference. It begins with calculation, an internal weighing of risks, for example. Or what will happen if I speak up? Will I lose credibility? Will I embarrass myself? Will it even matter? Will I be seen as weak or dramatic or disloyal to my gender? These calculations aren't unique to cowards. In fact, I think it's often more intense for men who genuinely want to do what's right because they're deeply aware of the social costs. They've been taught to fear making things worse. And they've been conditioned to avoid tension, to not make a scene, or to not step into what they might not be able to fix. This is, I think, one of the quiet tragedies of modern masculinity. It's that men are taught to be responsible, but not responsive. They're trained to carry burdens, but not to break patterns. They're told that real men stay composed, they stay in control, they stay uninvolved in matters of the heart. And so when harm appears, especially subtle harm, they freeze. Not because they don't care, but more so because they've never really been given the tools to intervene with confidence. And from a young age, many boys have been socialized into silence. They're praised for how low maintenance they are, for not being too sensitive, for minding their own business, right? And they learn that observation is safer than confrontation. And so they absorb messages like, don't get involved in another person's drama, right? Stay in your lane. And if it's not happening to you, don't stir the pot. And so a muscle begins to atrophy, and that's the muscle of intervention. The reflex to name what's wrong, the instinct to defend someone who's being harmed, even subtly. So instead, silence becomes a performance of control, a gesture, if you will, of neutrality, a signal to the group that I won't challenge the system and I'm not going to make this uncomfortable. But here's the thing though, when harm is normalized, neutrality is complicity. And in movements like 764, that's exactly how damage spreads. It's through the silence of good men. A man might hear another one saying something like really vile or degrading and think, oh, I don't agree with that. But then he adds, but it's not my place to correct him. He might see someone who's being emotionally manipulated, even online, and he'll think, that's wrong, but then he'll scroll past it because it's not my fight. He might feel something twist in his gut when he's watching a friend drift into the hateful ideologies. But then he'll stay quiet because confronting them is risky, awkward, or maybe even ungrateful. And while he's rationalizing this whole while, another man is getting pulled deeper into despair. Another woman is being left unsupported. Another cycle of harm continues to go unchallenged. And what we often fail to realize is that our silence doesn't just affect us, it echoes, it teaches. Especially, it teaches us that disengagement is honorable. It informs the culture around us that we believe things are fine when things are not fine. Movements like 764 don't just thrive because the men shouting into the void don't exist. They thrive because men are sitting in the room, hearing the despair and saying nothing. That's why reclaiming integrity matters. Not perfection, but integrity. The willingness to say, does my silence match who I say that I am? And if not, how am I going to start practicing something different? This is why intimacy also matters because it's not just romantic intimacy we're talking about, but the relational kind of honesty, the kind of connection where discomfort is not avoided, but it's respected, where people are safe enough with you to tell you their truths, and where you're safe enough within yourself to even tell your truth as well. The goal is not to become loud or confrontational or even performative. It's to become real, the kind of man whose presence doesn't disappear when it's needed the most. When good men stay silent, harm doesn't stop. It adapts. It finds new footing. It grows stronger in the absence of resistance. And even more devastating, it starts to feel normal. And over time, silence becomes more than a momentary choice. It becomes a culture, a room where everyone sees the thing, but no one says anything. Or a friendship where accountability is really off limits. A family where topics are always avoided, right? A workplace where staying in your lane is celebrated far more than speaking up. And eventually this culture creates casualties. In romantic relationships, we'll see silence manifested more like passivity. And one partner grows more controlling or harmful, while the other one looks away, justifying it with excuses like, it's not my place to judge, right? Or they're probably having their own reasons. Instead of stepping with clarity, they withdraw into comfort, and then someone gets hurt. In friendships, silence fractures trust. And when a man watches his friend spiraling into addiction or into anger or these online communities that radicalize and isolate, and then he says nothing, the friendship becomes hollow. Presence without truth is not loyalty. It's abandonment in disguise. And in broader culture, silence amongst good men creates this vacuum of leadership. And these harmful voices get louder, and the narratives in pain become more normalized. The 764 movement, it thrives because the majority agree, but because the majority are not really saying much. And when engagement disappears, healing disappears as well. The cost of looking away, though, isn't just external. It's deeply personal. Men who chronically are suppressing their conscience begin to feel the weight of it internally. They carry this quiet and growing discomfort, this tension that they can't quite name, or a shame that lingers after every moment that they chose safety over truth. And that shame often gets buried under humor or sarcasm or numbing habits. And it doesn't disappear, but just festers. And in that festering, something important dies. And that's a man's sense of what alignment looks like. He no longer feels like he's living a life that reflects who he truly is. He, in essence, becomes a performer in his own body, someone who's avoiding eye contact because when he sees himself and his reflection, deep down he knows that he's looking away from the important things. This is the hidden toll of passivity. It doesn't just damage others, it fragments you. It separates your actions from your values, and it makes you smaller so that no one really notices. And that's why reclaiming our voice isn't just about justice. It's also more so about wholeness. It's about giving yourself permission to be the man you wish others would be. The one who doesn't just wait for the perfect words or the perfect moments. The one who risks discomfort to preserve integrity. The one who is willing to be misunderstood in the service of something that's deeper. That's truth. I know it's not going to always be easy. oftentimes you will fumble and get it wrong. You'll overstep, you'll hesitate, you'll regret not saying something sooner. But the more you persevere in this track, the more growth will come, but not from silence. It comes from choosing to speak, even when your voice is shaky, even when the timing is clumsy, even when the room doesn't really know what to do with your honesty. Because every time a good man stops looking away and starts leaning in, and it starts attending to the tension and the discomfort and the accountability, I think significant shifts in culture happen. And that shift might start in helping another man who's slipping further and further into despair. There's a moment when a man realizes that he's been silent for too long. It might be the subtle feeling at first, right? A comment that he didn't challenge, or a moment that he let pass, a friend that he maybe didn't check on. But eventually, this becomes a pattern, a posture, a lifestyle. And when that moment of reckoning comes, it starts to bring questions. How did I get here? Why didn't I say something sooner? Can I still become the kind of man that I want to be and speak up in those moments when it matters? The answer is yes, but this doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intentionally choosing a different path. And that path begins with one word, and that is alignment. See, alignment does not mean perfection. It means that your actions are matching your convictions. It means that the voice in your head will say things like, this isn't right. And then finally, you begin to speak up in alignment with that. It means you're choosing discomfort over regrets, even when no one else is watching. And for men who want to stop looking away, the first step is not to become loud, but to become clear, to get honest with what you believe, and to name what you've been avoiding, to stop waiting for someone else to intervene, and instead to ask, what am I being invited to confront? You don't need to storm the stage, or you don't need to shout over others. You just need to show up with presence and with consistency and with courage. You don't need to fix injustice at every instance. You just need to stop pretending that you don't see the injustice. You don't need all the right words. You just need to begin. And when you do so, something remarkable begins to happen. Your presence becomes felt, not through dominance or volume, but through trustworthiness. See, people will start leaning in when you speak. And it's not because you're always right, but because you're always being genuine and real. This is where intimacy enters the picture. Because the work of not looking away cannot be done in isolation. You need people who will challenge you. You need people who are going to call you out, people who are going to call you up as well. You need people who remind you that your silence is not your safety. It's just your slow unraveling. You need relationships that actually make it harder to pretend. Here, the work that I'm doing at Uber Vintagers is to help men live lives that are marked by integrity and intimacy. Because I believe that silence is not a neutral act. It shapes us and it changes who we become. And the cost of looking away is far too high. So my dear listener, if you've been quiet, if you've been calculating how to avoid discomfort, and if you've been convinced that you yourself, this is not your place to speak up, this is your moment. Not to become someone else, but to return to the kind of person that you were meant to be. The one who does not vanish when things get uncomfortable. The one who doesn't really settle for performance anymore. The person who refuses to call silence wisdom when it really is just fear. See, you don't have to yell. You don't have to be perfect by any stretch of the means. You just have to stop looking away. Because when good men show up, everything starts to change. Let me know in the comments how this episode landed for you. I'd love to hear your insights that you had along the way. I'll see you in the next episode.